Madam President.
The senator from Indiana is recognized.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the call of the quorum be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I come to the floor today frustrated, as many of us are, that once again we're not able to address legislation in the way the Senate is designed to address, and that is to debate, to discuss, to offer amendments, to vote. Once again, the majority leader has decided that he didn't like the amendments that some of us were proposing, and therefore used a procedure which shuts off all opportunity to provide an amendment. We're allowed to come down and give our little speeches, but there's no debate. There's no back and forth. There's no record of where we stand on certain issues except for final passage. I think the American people want more than that. That's not why they sent us here. This is my second time in the Senate with a 12-year gap in between. And a lot of people ask me, what has changed since the first time? And I said, well, one thing that's dramatically changed, which didn't happen during my first 10 years in the Senate, was that we used to be able to essentially come to the floor and offer any amendment at any time to any bill. That's the difference between the Senate procedures and the House of Representatives. We don't have a Rules Committee that dictates which amendments can be offered and which ones can't. This is supposed to be a body where we have open discussion, where any member can offer any amendment to any bill at any time. And in my first 10 years, that's what we did. Now, it made for long nights, it made for long days, but we were performing a function that our founding fathers designed for us to fulfill. And somehow it worked out. And we went on record. Our yay was yay and our nay was nay, and it was there for the public to see. The amendments that were offered, the debate that took place, the vote that was conducted was there, and we had to go home and explain why we voted yes or why we voted no, and the public, it was full transparency. And today, and in this period of time, I've just been here a year and a month, in my second stint here in the Senate, it's very seldom when we have that opportunity. And once again, here on a highway bill that affects every American in every state, it's been expanded and extended a number of times, and we finally get to the real thing, and then our side puts up some amendments, and the majority looks at them and says, no, we don't want our members to have to vote on this, and so we're going to use a procedure called filling the tree. Now, that doesn't mean anything to Americans. Filling the tree, what are you talking about? There is a procedure here by which you can only offer so many amendments to a particular bill before you're precluded from offering another. And the majority leader of the Senate, whether it's Republican or Democrat, has the opportunity, if they want to take it, to gain the floor and procedurally put us in a position where no amendments can be offered, and then move to talking about it, but then move to immediate debate. This is not the way we ought to proceed. Well, I was prepared to give this highway bill a real chance. I had some real problems with the bill that is before us. The House is passing legislation that has many things in it that I like, some things that I don't like, and we were all looking for an opportunity to try to address those particular concerns that we had. I have a particular concern with the bill that is brought before the Senate, because this bill, for starters, goes into the general fund and beyond the sales tax for gasoline purchases fund. You know, everybody thinks that, when they pull up to the pump and fill up their car with gas, they know there's the federal tax attached to the price that you pay. But they know that it goes into, quote, a tax fund specially designed to provide for construction and provide for return to the state so that they can build the roads and repair the bridges and do things associated with transportation. And that's why we pay that gas tax. And that's supposed to be apportioned in a rational way out back to the states so that they can do what is needed for their state to provide the kind of transportation that their state wants. This bill not only uses up all the money that's paid in to that fund, but adds an additional $12 billion of spending that's from the general fund, and the pay-fors, from my perspective, aren't legitimate. And so once again, we're in a situation where we're borrowing money, going into debt, increasing deficit spending and increasing the debt limit, or load that we have, in order to enhance the money that we're going to send out to the states. Many of us have basically said that based on what we have seen and has happened here in years, that has driven us into a deficit which cannot be sustained and in a debt which may never be repaid, that we're simply not going to support legislation that spends more without it being paid for, that spends more than we take in. We just simply can't keep doing this. And now we're in a situation where we have a bill before us that is needed because we need these funds to go to the states to build these roads and repair these bridges, but yet we are dipping into the general fund for an additional $12 billion. Secondly, there's an inequitable treatment here to states. And I bring this chart here to show just how this affects various states. If you take what a state has paid into the fund and look at what a state receives back, and you will see that there is an inequity present here, that part of the general fund money that's going into this might try to make up for some of that. But if we stay with the principle upon which highway funding has always been funded, and that is that a state, its return to its proportionate share of what its taxpayers pay when they pull up to the pump in that state and fill their car with gas, there are some states that fall in a real deep deficit. It starts with the state of Texas, and that's on top here, and Texas loses $1,137 million of money that is paid in but doesn't come back to them under the formula. My home state of Indiana, third on the list. We lose $275 million because what we pay into the fund is not returned to us. So these are all the donor states. Donor states are those that pay in more than they receive back. And they're pretty big states. And they have a real stake in this. And they would have had a real stake in this amendment. And they would have had an opportunity to vote for or against this amendment had I been allowed to offer it. So the states of Texas, Georgia, $283 million, New Jersey, Florida, California, Ohio, Virginia, Michigan, Illinois, on and on it goes. Members can take a look at this chart. This is the amount of money that they lose because they're not getting their fair share back. And so they're the donor states. And the money then that they lose is sent to other states that are the donee states. So our taxpayers in Indiana are paying equivalent of $283 million to other states. Now, we've been a state that has managed our fiscal situation very well. And we have been very careful with how, we have this old-fashioned belief that you shouldn't spend more money than you take in. And we live by that principle in Indiana. And so we've been careful in how we've managed our money and how we've used the money that is sent to us that we've paid in to the gas tax fund. And yet we're penalized because we have managed our finances well, and our taxpayers end up sending money to states that haven't done so well. Now, the second problem here is that this bill falls short on the fact that earmarks that we no longer are doing, but yet those earmarks over the past several years where members have been able to direct a specific amount of money to a specific project within their state, so-called earmark, where the total of those earmarks go into the total average of spending for that particular state. And the formula then is based on the fact that the big earmarkers end up getting more money, while states like Indiana that have not pursued those earmarks lose out, because the average is based on the accumulative amount that is paid into the fund, including earmarks. So once again, a state that has been careful in terms of managing and spending its money ends up being penalized because we haven't pursued earmarks, which fortunately are no longer part of our method of doing business around here. Indiana pays approximately 2.71% of the total federal gas tax, and we'd like to get 2.71 of that back. And if we do get that back, it will have a significant effect. We have a second chart here that talks about what is paid into the Highway Trust Fund, just for a few states that we've listed, the apportionment under the bill that's before us, and the amount that is below the fair share. And I've read some of those. Again, Texas, Georgia, Indiana, New Jersey, and Florida being the top 5 states that are penalized for this. Madam Chairman, I also had amendments that I was going to add here that would give states greater flexibility in terms of how they use the money that they receive. We've all heard the stories about money being diverted to things that a state doesn't want because there's a formula attached to the legislation that says you've got to spend X percent of money on certain projects like bike paths and walking paths and other enhancements, the so-called enhancements. I'm not against that. I mean, I use those. I jog on bike paths and appreciate some of those enhancements. But that ought to be a state decision in terms of how it allocates its money and not a federal decision. Because a one-size-fits-all dictated by a particular piece of legislation simply does not take into the individual needs of a particular state. One state might decide to use it for a larger percentage for this, that, or something else. Other states may want to say, look, our roads are in such shape that we and our bridges need repair. At least for this year or this next 2 years, we're going to divert the money into strictly construction and repair projects. Others might say, well, we're in a little bit better shape this year and we can use some of this. That ought to be for the state to decide and not a piece of legislation coming out of this body. Finally, another amendment that I would have liked to have been able to offer, if not for the majority leader's refusal for an open amendment process, is one that would have limited the scope of eligible transportation enhancement projects. I think we hear these reports every day about crumbling roads and unsafe bridges. And yet what we are doing in this bill is limiting how a state determines where it puts its funds. And so I think we ought to narrow that option, if not take it away. And so that's an amendment also that I was going to use. Madam President, to wrap up, let me just say I think it's very unfortunate, more than unfortunate, that we have resorted to a system here where if the other side, and I say this if we were in the majority, I would say this to my leader if my party was in the majority. This is not how the Senate is supposed to operate. Someone from the other side who has an amendment that we don't like, they ought to have the opportunity to offer that amendment. And they ought to have the opportunity to debate that amendment and to require a vote on that amendment. And then we can vote yes or we can vote no, and public can judge us accordingly. But to simply shut it all down and not give anybody that opportunity, I think, is not the kind of procedure that we want. And finally, let me just simply say that this bill brought before us is a flawed bill. And without the process of amending it, the opportunity to amend, to fix what we think is wrong with it, puts us in a position where it's impossible to say you can vote for something like this. And so for the reasons I've articulated and for other reasons that hope that will come out as we make these speeches on the floor but don't have a chance to offer amendments, I just simply cannot support this bill as it is. And I think I've probably exceeded my time, and with that, I yield back and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.